How the illusion of time keeps you miserable. The cruelest trick of time is not that it passes. It's that it never arrives. You have lived, mostly, in a harbor that has always been a map. You keep waiting for the future to dock, for the ship with your name on the hull to break the horizon in triumphant white foam. Meanwhile, the gulls cry over the same water, the same wind stings your eyes, and you call this ache patience. It feels wise, almost holy, to wait, to prepare, to be disciplined for what's surely coming. And then night comes again, and you are still on the pier with pockets full of tomorrows. This is the forbidden's truth. The future is a rumor, and you have built your schedule around it like a cathedral. Your faith is expensive. It costs you your presence. It costs you the warm heaviness of coffee in your hand, the pulse of blood in your knuckles when you hold someone you love, the crumple in your throat when you hear a song that remembers you better than you remember yourself. The illusion of time is not just an error in thinking. It is a ritual of worship that steals from the altar of now. We inherited clocks before we knew what they were for. In monasteries, bells divided the day into hours for prayer. Time measured devotion. Then the city walls grew teeth called factories, and bells divided the day into hours for labor. Time measured obedience. Men wore pocket watches like talismans. Women learned to turn their hands into calendars, marked in chores and births and grief. The invisible river was given numbers. Once named, it began to command. People who stepped out of rhythm were called lazy or mad or saints. Most of us preferred not to gamble on sainthood. Your misery does not come primarily from the past you can't change or the future you can't predict. It comes from a superstition that life is located somewhere else on the line. You live governed by a preposition after. After this exam, after the move, after the wedding, the raise, the hustle, the baby, the big break, the pension, the diagnosis, the cure. A whole life can be run on after. You become a missionary to a far-off land where you will finally be allowed to be yourself. You mail money and energy to that land. You stop building your house here because your heart is always packed. Modern culture lends you its tools for this postponement. Productivity apps, 5-year plans, a calendar squinting at you from your pocket. You measure, optimize, streamline. You become a foreman of your own minutes, patrolling them for waste. You narrate your days in a future tense, going to should soon. And yet the clock on the wall does not grant entry into the place you seek. Every minute that arrives belongs to you in the same way oxygen belongs to lungs. All at once, with no interest, without the possibility of savings. This is not to say there is no such thing as history, no such thing as change or planning. The harvest depends on sowing. The bridge asks to be engineered. But notice the shape of your attention as it bends away from the living moment in front of you and toward a ghost called later. Notice what happens to your breath when you believe happiness is always deferred. The inhale becomes an IOU. The exhale sounds like a concession. You grow fluent in a language where everything is a means, and the end never comes. There is a gathering sorrow that follows. It is not dramatic. It grows like moss. You wake, and the first feeling you know is the weight of time, what you haven't done, what you must do, what the day might punish you with if you fail to keep pace. Even joys are conscripted into the schedule. A walk becomes a step count. A book becomes an achievement. The mingling of friends becomes networking, which is friendship knocked into an angle and made to produce. This is how the illusion of time keeps you poor, even as your calendar fills. Nothing pays out in presents. You work, and your reward is the permission to work for better rewards. History made a bargain with you before you were born. If you learn to run by the clock, we will give you safety. The promise is older than the alarm on your phone. In fields, seasons were the masters, and people bent their backs to cycles they could not control. In cities, the masters moved inside buildings and organized those cycles into units. School bells rehearsed children for factories. Factories rehearsed adults for offices. The speed of the assembly line divided your attention into obedient slices. Your school report card was the first ledger in which your soul learned to see itself as units of time well used or wasted. And what is the worst sin in this church? Being idle. Being present can look like that from the outside, but there is a more intimate origin of your time sickness. You are told explicitly or by osmosis that the self is a project, an unfinished thing always in need of improvement. You learn to hold a tape measure to your day, your body, your patience, your output. You learn to compare timelines. You learn to identify your peers and the moments they passed you by, a track meet happening inside your skull that no one else can see. Your body, trying to help, dials up adrenaline for races that do not exist. Your nervous system becomes a siren. You lay down at night, and the siren continues in the distance, a reminder that someone somewhere is getting ahead while you are not. We made time into money, and then we spent our lives in a market that never closes. Time is money. Sounds efficient until you realize money is always at the mercy of scarcity and fear. Scarcity closes the heart. Fear narrows the eyes. Now imagine living this way for decades. No wonder your throat is tight. No wonder kindness feels indulgent. No wonder you look past the window to the glare of the screen and call that grown-up. To orient your life to a ledger is to live at a distance from the only thing that is not theory. The taste of the apple, the warmth of the dog, the ache in the foot. It means you've walked somewhere worth your time. The illusion wears many masks. For some, it is the endless deferral of rest sleep when you're dead. Grind now, reward later. For others, it is the endless deferral of risk wait until you're ready, until you've read one more book, until the world is hospitable. For still others, it is the endless deferral of forgiveness, when they apologize, when I'm stronger, when it hurts less. In each case, time becomes the accountant that guards the vault. You show your credentials at the door, and the door never opens. You do not see that the vault is empty, and that the gold has always been stored in your mouth, in your eyes, in your fingertips, in the strange mercy of being alive. It is blasphemy in polite circles to say that time is an illusion. The calendar is right there on the wall. You can feel joints stiffen, see gray hair. Trains leave and do not wait. But the oaths you have sworn are not to the facts of change. They are to the fantasies built on top of them. You have sworn allegiance to the idea that your life is elsewhere. You have mortgaged the present for a house in a city that cannot be found on any map. The payments are steep. They are paid in anxiety, in the inability to enjoy small joys without scanning them for market value, in the fascination with other people's timelines as if their graphs could reveal the secret chord you were meant to play. There is another way to be, but it requires something impolite, a betrayal. You must betray the cult of later. You must walk out of the service mid-sermon, leave your hymnal on the pew, and step into the sunlight where time is something softer, more like weather. Some days wild, some days still. Not an authority, but a climate through which you move. The first step of betrayal is noticing. Noticing when you abandon the moment for an abstract future. Noticing when you deny joy because it wasn't scheduled. Noticing the particular form your misery takes. The clench in your jaw at 3:11 p.m. The way you fidget while someone you love talks because your inner foreman is tapping his watch. A paradox waits at the bottom of this descent. The more you try to manage time to get to happiness, the less available happiness becomes. It is not because you are weak or undisciplined. It's because happiness is not a place on the line. It is a way of touching what is already in reach. The hand that reaches backward and forward snatches at air. The hand that lowers into the bowl finds water. For now, simply admit this uncomfortable suspicion. You have been living for years inside a story where the hero never arrives. The hero is always about to start. You are both hero and author, and you keep moving the beginning to next week. If you can feel the absurdity, good. If you can feel the grief, better. If you can taste the anger at yourself, at a culture that taught you to be a mechanical man on a conveyor belt, then you are awake enough to continue. We will go down another level and look at the gears and levers. Not to break time, which does not need breaking, but to stop mistaking the brass for the sun. To understand how the illusion tightens its hands around your throat, you have to sit quietly in its workshop. This is not a room with clocks. This is a room with mirrors. Your mind survives by storytelling. It strings moments into a necklace and calls the necklace me. The beads are carefully selected, smooth victories, glittering humiliations, that strange stone from childhood, heavy with meaning. Between the beads are not silences where things do not fit. You touch this necklace all day, fearing the thread will snap. You reinforce it with plans and regrets. You do not notice that in defending the story of yourself across time, you imprison yourself in time's logic. The past is your museum. You are the curator and the captive, pacing the halls of exhibits labeled formative. The mind is proud of this museum. It feels prudent to keep it polished. But memory is not a camera. It is a collage. You retell your past into the shape that protects today's identity. That might be a necessary mercy. It also might be the reason you cannot be surprised. If your past cannot breathe, neither can your present. You suffer because you mistake the museum for the world. Then there is the future, that ever-receding coastline. The future serves two main functions, hope and control. Hope lets you endure a gray morning. Control lets you pretend your suffering is reimbursable. The problem is not hope or planning. It is when they become superstitions. You defer your aliveness to a procession of upgrades. When I lose the weight, when I publish the book, when the market turns, when the house is in order, when the love arrives, when the country improves. Hope markets itself well. What it sells at the door, though, is not contentment, but permission to postpone. Control markets itself as competence. What it sells is anxiety, because almost nothing obeys you fully except your breath, and even that is borrowed. The culture you swim in builds devices that exploit both. Think of the streak. How apps turn your life into a run of uninterrupted days performing a task. Miss one and the app acts like a disappointed parent. Think of countdowns to sales that reset every day, making scarcity a permanent background radiation. Think of social timelines that arrange lives as ascending arcs and let you watch others' highlight reels as if they were warnings or commands. The economy of attention harnesses your time sickness and sells you treatments that prolong the disease. Courses promising mastery, pills promising seamless sleep, vacations promising to rescue you from the very schedule you will rebuild the minute you return. Meanwhile, your body pays in coin that cannot be refunded. Chronic stress is not a metaphor. It is cortisol eroding the banks of your organs. It is a jaw set so tightly it changes the map of your face. It is a stomach that mistakes coffee for courage. It is the quiet resignation of hands that have forgotten softness because they are always reaching, grasping, typing, scheduling. Ask your body what time it is, and it will answer with sensation. It will say, right now there is pressure in the chest. Right now there is warmth behind the eyes. Right now there is hunger in the belly. Notice how often you argue with this evidence in favor of a thought about later. If the illusion were only cultural, we could stage a revolution. But it is also intimate, coiled around your deepest fear. The closer you come to the present, the more naked you feel. Without past, what explains you? Without future, what saves you? The present asks you to be a verb instead of a resume. Many of us would rather be a good story told across decades than a flawed aliveness happening this minute. It is safer to be a myth than to be touched. That safety breeds loneliness. There is a theory you learned early. You are the manager of your life's timeline. You can optimize your way to worthiness. Hidden inside is a contempt for the unplanned and the unfinished, for grief and for rest. The illusion of time becomes a way to avoid mourning. If sorrow can be scheduled, it can be postponed. If love can be managed, it can be made to fit between meetings. So the tender parts of you are placed on layaway. The price accumulates. One day you realize you have lived years without letting yourself be wrecked by beauty. You have protected yourself from time's unpredictability by becoming a clock yourself. Clocks are elegant. They do not feel. Consider this contradiction. The more you sacrifice the present for imagined futures, the less capable you become of inhabiting the future when it arrives. You practice absence. You get good at it. So when the child is finally grown and visits on Sundays, you are in the kitchen, still rushing. When the book is released, you are refreshing numbers rather than reading the letters people sent you that made their throats ache. When the love arrives, you interrogate it like a passport officer stamping a visa in a romance you believe must be regulated to be real. The future cannot reward you for abandoning the present. The future is a present trying to survive under the weight of your projections. History deepens the diagnosis. Before clocks, time was seasonal, embodied, liturgical. Festivals marked harvests and solstices. Work ebbed and flowed. Then, in the late medieval and early modern worlds, time was regimented first by prayer, then by capital. The factory whistle replaced the church bell. By the 19th century, railroads imposed standardized time zones so trains could keep schedules and people could keep trains. Precision became virtue. By the 20th, Taylorism studied the body like a machine. Stopwatch in hand, men in ties extracted seconds from motions. The human becomes a series of optimizations. Into this inheritance you were born. When you feel guilty for pausing to taste your tea, when you apologize for thinking slowly, you are not neurotic. You are faithful to a creed. That time is a raw material to be processed into productivity. But there is another history, quieter in the margins. Time, understood not as a threat, but as a river you join by swimming. Wisdom traditions have been telling you, gently and incessantly, that the only place anything occurs is here. Not in the headline of a century, not in the biography summary. Here is where the loaf rises or falls. Here is where breath happens or doesn't. Here is where the light on the table makes a holy geometry out of 2 cups and a bowl of oranges. The illusion fights back with a sneer. This is sentimental, as if tenderness were an offense against reality, as if your ability to pay attention were not the very definition of being alive. Look also at the way the illusion colonizes love. Lovers negotiate calendars more than they negotiate touch. When we move in together, when the project ends, when the kids are older, love becomes a partnership in logistics. The present is treated like a staging area for a production scheduled for a later season. In the meantime, affection takes the shape of future tasks done in the name of care. It is a noble shape, but not the only one. There is an intimacy available only to those who surrender their grip on next. It feels like this. The clock is still on the wall, but the room has decided to ignore it. The room breathes with you. The evening lengthens itself, the way cats lengthen in a beam of sun. The illusion also colonizes your morality. You judge yourself on timelines. At this age, I should have. By now, people like me usually. You turn virtues into deadlines. I will be kinder when I am less busy. I will be generous after the promotion. I will finally call my mother when I am not so tired. Time becomes an alibi for hardness. You don't ask whether these are the last days you have with someone. The thought is improvised, but it lands like truth once in a while and scares you into calling. Then the call becomes a task, and the tenderness thins. You are not cruel. You are practiced at deferring. The fear that drives all this is not abstract. It has a name that is almost impolite to say. Death. Time is the stage on which death approaches. If you loosen your grip on timelines, if you inhabit the present, death looks closer. The future, even an anxious one, acts like a shield. You keep your eyes on the calendar because it is easier than keeping them on the vanishing point. But here is the quiet scandal. Being with your life now is the only available antidote to the dread. Death is not postponed by anxiety. It is postponed by luck, medicine, and in the meantime, populated by moments that can be lived or not. You cannot negotiate with endings. You can decide whether to be alive while they approach. The last move the illusion makes is clever. It writes itself into your identity. You say, I'm a planner with pride. You say, I'm behind with shame. You say, I'm busy with a mix of both. The line becomes a morality tale where ahead and behind replace good and bad. But ahead of what? Behind whom? The plot holes are obvious, and you fill them with anxiety, because anxiety is better than meaninglessness. The truth might be simpler and therefore harder. You are here, and the rest is fog. To be free of the illusion is not to become irresponsible. It is to become intimate with the limits of your control, to fall in love with the present, not as a consolation prize, but as the only prize there ever was. If this sounds like surrender, good. Surrender is the proper reaction to a God you cannot impress and a clock you cannot bully. The trick is learning the difference between surrender and collapse. Collapse is when you give in to despair and call it realism. Surrender is when you give up the imaginary war against what is and find your hands suddenly free to cook, to write, to call, to build, to touch, to look until things glow. The illusion of time keeps you miserable because it keeps your hands clenched. You cannot hold anything that way, not even yourself. There is a way out, but it is not a jailbreak with a trumpet. It is a thaw. It starts with the smallest act of treason against the doctrine of later. You treat this ordinary moment as if it were the point, not the rehearsal, not the waiting room, not the preface, the point. You do not need incense or a monastery for this. You need to be willing to drop your argument with the room you are in. Let your gaze settle on what it lands on without trying to improve it. Call this attention or prayer or sanity. It is not noble. It is practical. It returns your life to a scale that fits inside human hands. The trap has always been the belief that your life would happen in a cleaner room. But rooms are messy by design. There are cups with stains, proofs of coffee. There are crumbs and emails, and a jacket you keep meaning to hang. There is a child asking, in the middle of your important thoughts, if ghosts can see each other. There is a dog sighing in an old sunbeam. There is a sorrow that sits beside you like an ant who doesn't talk much and doesn't leave early. The illusion says, later, when the room is sorted, when the grief is gone, when the body shapes itself into a promise you can keep. The practice says, here, with this, even if this hurts, especially if it does. Otherwise, your life shrinks to the size of the moments you can control, which is to say it shrinks to nearly nothing. The shift is not philosophical first. It is habitual. You begin to treat your attention as a home rather than as a staging ground. You stop renting it out to catastrophes that have not occurred. You begin to watch your mind as it tries to index everything into before and after. You notice that the tightness in your chest is not a premonition but a sensation. It can be met, not managed. Meeting is different from managing. Managing insists on a result, and therefore resists the moment. Meeting lets the moment do what it does. Meeting says, breathe. Managing says, schedule. You do not abandon your plans. You relocate them. They stop being the scaffolding holding up your life and start being tools in a belt you wear lightly. You plan a trip. You plan the book. You plan the budget. But you do not sacrifice the day to them. You plan while listening for the way the air moves through the room. You plan while tasting the salt of your own skin when you happen to lick your finger and are surprised to be an animal again. This sounds strange, because you were trained to be an abstraction. The present makes you mammal. It returns you to scales that make sense. The speed of a conversation, the rhythm of a heartbeat, the way bread tells you it is done by the sound it makes when you knock on it. Let me tell you what begins to happen when you practice treason against later. Time loosens its grip. A morning no longer feels like an obstacle course. It feels like weather moving across a field that includes you. Tasks lose their mythic weight. Dishes become a human-sized ritual. Laundry becomes proof of life. The book becomes not your legacy, but pages you get to arrange. You are allowed to enjoy the work without making a vow to monetize it, without measuring your hours like grain poured into a hopper. Richness returns, a richness measured in textures rather than trophies. Your relationships alter in this climate. The people you love notice a difference they cannot quite name. You stop bargaining with them in units of time. You begin to give them attention instead, which has always been what they wanted, and what you wanted from them. You listen without waiting for the future, where they understand you better. You love without the contract of what tomorrow is supposed to look like. This does not make you a fool. It makes you honest. Love is a present tense skill. You do not build a life with someone by drafting meticulous plans that will be interrupted by everything. You build a life by attending to interruptions together until what you have built is a home. What about urgency? The world is on fire. The bills are due. The body ages anyway. If presence were apathy, it would be an ethical failure. But presence is the opposite of apathy. It is an engine. The work that matters is too delicate to be carried by panic alone. Panic drops things. Presence picks them up and hands them across the fire line again and again, without narrating itself as a martyr. When you stop hating time, you stop rushing past the places where your small usefulness lives. The petition gets signed. The neighbor gets checked on. The care gets delivered, not promised. Your activism stops being fueled by the theater of outrage and starts being shaped by the intimacy of tasks. As you trust the present, grief arrives more freely. This is part of a bargain. You will feel the cost of years, the way births and deaths rearrange a neighborhood, how certain doors never reopened. The illusion kept those truths behind smoked glass. When the glass is gone, the shock can sweep you to your knees. Let it. The ground was always there. Grief is not the enemy of joy. It is the proof that joy mattered. A life spent outrunning the present is a life spent outrunning the funerals and the birthdays alike. You cannot hide from one without losing the other. The mature heart says yes to both and does not insist that time explain itself. There is a practical spirituality that follows. You begin to build rituals that ground you in this moment without insulting the future. A low table at which you leave your phone before meals. A walk without a destination at least once a week, where the point is to let the sidewalks rearrange your thoughts. A rule about speaking to yourself the way you would to a guest you love, which means not threatening yourself with timelines you cannot possibly meet. A calendar that holds fewer things and holds them more gently. Not as resolutions, which are high-voiced promises to an imaginary judge, but as invitations to real places with real people, and with you as one of them. Your work changes flavor. It ceases to be a campaign for victory over time, and becomes a conversation with time's texture. You notice the days when your attention is ample, and you ride it. You notice the days when your attention is thin, and you stop insisting on doing the work of a hero. You leave heroics for fires. You begin to practice not because you want to be perfect later, but because practice is what hands do when they are alive: piano keys, garden soil, clay, code, rope, wire. The word craft returns to your vocabulary without irony. Craft is an old way of saying time lived in, not time counted. And death, which once crouched at the edge of your vision as a threat, moves closer as a teacher. Not a friend. You needn't romanticize it. but a truth teller you can consult. How would I spend this afternoon if I could see the end on the horizon? How would I speak to this person if I knew nothing else was guaranteed? These questions are not morbid. They are merciful. They pierce the illusion's armor. They make you generous in ways schedules never could. They take you outside to watch the evening try on its first star, which does not solve anything and solves enough. What will people think when you stop genuflecting before the calendar? Some will call you irresponsible. Some will envy you and disguise it as critique. Some will not notice because they are drowning in their own later. Let them. Your allegiance cannot be to appearances. Your allegiance is to what is happening in your hands. Over time, real time, the kind you can taste, the ones who matter, will feel the reliability in you that anxiety could never offer. You become a person who shows up on a Tuesday with soup, not a person who texts apologies on Sunday night for being perpetually slammed. The illusion produces apologies at scale. Presence produces soup. If you do this long enough, the world changes color. Not because you transcended time, because you corrected your relationship to it. The line turns into a field. You start noticing how many doors are open that you pretended were shut. You are less bored because boredom is mostly the friction of a mind trying to be somewhere else. You are less hurried because hurrying is mostly the habit of narrating a better later. You are more easily moved, which is both a risk and a relief. You cry in public sometimes. You laugh while washing a bowl, and no one understands why, least of all you. The miracle is not that time slows down. It's that you stop trying to outrun it and discover it was never chasing you. None of this immunizes you from pain, failure, or the weather. Some days the illusion will win. You will wake convinced that the future is a courtroom and you must prepare your defense. Fine. Notice it. Drink water. Touch a doorframe. Say your name aloud as if it were a spell that summons you into the room where your life is happening. Begin again, which is the only way anyone ever begins. And if you want a rule, let it be small enough to fit in a pocket. Trade as few present moments as possible for imaginary ones. Spend them as if they were the only currency that will ever matter, because they are. Pay full price to sit with your father and not check the time. Pay full price to taste the tomato that tastes like the sun decided to become fruit. Pay full price to rest when your body stops negotiating and starts begging. Pay full price to do the brave thing now in the rough draft, not the perfect thing later in the polished version of a life no one ever gets to live. The ship you waited for at the harbor was your own body, already rocking on the tide, already bound for shore after shore called Tuesday. September 3 o'clock, the hand of a friend, the smell of rain hitting dust. It arrived while you were busy tracking its progress. Look up, the gangway is down. No announcement will be made. It is your move. If this opened your eyes, subscribe to Boring History, because the truth is never boring.